Welcome to the Ray Harryhausen podcast, the show dedicated to the life, career and films of a special effects titan. Join us as we host in-depth discussions about the work, influences and legacy of this uniquely talented filmmaker. Brought to you by the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, we will be delving into Ray's archive to bring a unique insight into his work, including exclusive audio from the man himself from our own archives. We will be joined by special guests for retrospectives, exclusive announcements and competitions, so this podcast is a must-listen for all fans of the world of Ray Harryhausen, animation and classic filmmaking.
Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Ray Harryhausen podcast. We've got lots to tell you today and some exclusive news, and as always you'll be hearing from Ray Harryhausen himself. I'm John Walsh and I'm a trustee of the foundation, and as always I'm joined by our brilliant collections manager Connor Heaney. Hello Connor.
Hello John, it's a pleasure to be back recording episode 21 during quite an action-packed time with the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation.
Yes indeed, yeah, we've had, if you're listening to this early September, then you may have come along to the BFI screening of Harryhausen the movie posters at the BFI in London, where Richard Hollis showed an exclusive preview of his book in advance of publication and showed two very special films, one of which had never been seen outside the border Scottish TV region since the 1960s. You came along, Connor. What did you think of that border television programme?
No, that was something special because I was thinking about this afterwards. I think that might be the earliest recording that I've heard of Ray speaking at any great length about his films, way back in 1969, just following the release of The Valley of Gwangi. And I was lucky enough to be sitting next to Ray's daughter, Vanessa Harryhausen, who also came to the event, and she was racking her brains afterwards. It was a long time ago that this documentary or this TV show was recorded, and quite interesting to see a younger Ray discussing his work in the middle of his career, not necessarily looking back, but right in the midst of a series of classic films and describing his techniques.
Absolutely, it was called The Man Who Makes Monsters. And it was a half hour programme by ICV region Border Television, which is the Scottish area. And it was sort of this is the description that the BFI gives it: a charming, informal, clip-heavy interview with Ray Harryhausen about his illustrious career and his latest movie, The Valley of Gwangi. So it kind of tells you, where in Ray's sort of timeline it's all set. But it's wonderful because the interview, I think in some places is a bit cheeky and asks us a few kind of pointed questions in the way that local news might, and it has the look and feel of a local news programme with no disrespect to local news. It's wonderful, and it's terrific that the BFI have it. So Dick Fiddy, who's in charge of all of these sort of missing, believed, wiped programmes at the BFI, hosted the event, and under the sort of the direction of Justin Johnson, the programme manager. And it's marvellous. I'm hoping that the foundation may be able to access either some or all of the programme, and we can bring you maybe a clip or perhaps the whole programme at some point in the future, because in terms of visual history, in terms of oral history, in terms of Ray's media timeline, it's a real big tick for us at the foundation. I'd never seen it before. I'd heard of it, and this is why the BFI is such a sort of jewel in the crown when it comes to media, because we're going to have a little chat later on this episode about lost Harryhausen materials. This is fabulous, and for it to have survived as well. I want to see more of this, Connor, don't you? More sort of lost Harryhausen.
Well, this is perfect. This is the kind of thing that fans get in touch about, because often people will have vague memories of seeing Ray on the television, and they'll say, I'm sure I saw Ray in the 1960s at some point on a black and white television show being interviewed. And obviously at our end, without the BFI, it would be quite hard to track down and verify these things, and to find out information about these programmes that would otherwise be lost to history. So a wonderful job by the BFI, and again, it just goes to show you should save everything, because it will be of great interest one day.
Absolutely. Then they showed my film next, which I had no influence over. They asked. So my film school documentary, Ray Harryhausen Movement into Life, was played. And it was marvellous to see it played now that it's been fully restored. And right after Ray's black and white appearance on board of television, it made it shine all the more brightly. So thank you, BFI, for allowing me that tiny moment in the spotlight. And Richard Hollis's book, Connor, was up next. You've seen my documentary before, of course. Is it the first time you've seen it with that sort of cinema level projection?
Yes, I think so. We often your documentary gets screened at presentations that we make and at events that we partake in, but obviously the BFI is a custom cinema, so to see it on the big screen at that scale was very interesting. And again, Vanessa was there too, and she commented that that's the first time she'd seen it on any kind of big screen, so it was very enjoyable for her as well. And the two films sort of topped and tailed each other nicely, different stages of Ray's career.
And then, of course, it was a presentation by Richard Hollis, an exclusive first look inside the book. Now, myself and Connor, of course, have seen it in some detail, but Connor, to see those images on the big screen again, it seemed quite different, didn't it? They were really quite glorious.
Well, I thought I knew a lot about Ray Harryhausen posters, given all the hard work that we've all put in over the last year or so to prepare images for Richard's wonderful book, but he was so informative, going into the detail behind the artwork for all of these great films and the artists involved too, and the reasons why artwork from around the world or during different eras could potentially be different. And it's a very in-depth exploration of some of his highlights from the book. Fascinating to see them on the big screen, having these stylistic differences explained by an expert. Was an incredibly worthwhile experience, and I recommend anybody who didn't make it to get hold of the book and have a look at Richard's in-depth analysis of artwork throughout the 20th century for Ray Harryhausen.
And congratulations to the proud winner of the book. Richard posed a very difficult film poster related question and somebody won a copy. If you didn't make it down to the BFI for that, you may be interested to know of something else, something bigger coming up. Again in London, this time on the 8th of September. Richard Hollis will be signing copies, first edition copies of his Harryhausen the Movie poster book at the Forbidden Planets megastore on Shaftesbury Avenue, and that's on Saturday the 8th of September from 12 noon. Now, Richard, I think, is only going to be signing for 1 hour, so if you want to get your book signed, you do need to get down there before 12 to start queuing. We'll be there from the foundation as well. I'll be around, so if you want to come and say hello. And then that follows, we're in partnership here with Titan Books, Forbidden Planet, and Regent Street Cinema, which is London's oldest cinema, and one of its biggest, for a very special world premiere screening of the DCP 2K transfer of First Men in the Moon in its full anamorphic widescreen aspect with 5.1 stereo sound. So that's quite an afternoon. That starts at 3 o'clock at the Regent Street Cinema on the 8th of September. You can book online now if you want to get a ticket or two, and I'd strongly recommend it. I'll be presenting an exclusive presentation from the foundation. We may have a special guest or two from the film itself. Terry Marrison, who is an actor who appeared as a child in the original film, will be joining the audience, and I'm hoping to get Terry on stage. And also Richard Hollis will be presenting his BFI presentation of the poster book afterwards. So anyone who missed it there at BFI will get a chance to see it. And we may have another book to give away once it's not all sold out. So that's quite special, Connor, isn't it?
Well, yes, because I think for fans of Ray Harryhausen, these screenings are more than just film screenings. They tend to turn into sort of mini Harryhausen conventions. So last week at the BFI, all sorts of interesting people were there. Mike Hankin, the author of the Master of the Magic series, Andy Johnston and Mark Mostyn, who are two of the Foundation's photographer, Alan Friswell, our conservator, alongside obviously John and myself, and Vanessa Harryhausen, Caroline Munro. So all of these people related to Ray's work were there, and it turns into a huge conversation after the film because fans get to chat to one another and chat to us. And it will be the same at the Regent Street Cinema on the 8th of September. You'll be able to chat to John, you'll be able to chat to people who are actually in the film, as well as asking Richard questions about his new book and get a signed copy. So It'll be a mini event, a Harryhausen day in its own right, and it's not to be missed.
And just a shout out to some other names. Neil Pettigrew, who is a bit of an expert in this field and a published author on stop motion animation, was there because he contributed posters to the book, as did Simon Greetham and his son Rowan Greetham, who'd contributed posters from their private collection to the Richard Hollis book. And it really has been a wonderful exercise in bringing together sort of well-known authors like Mike Hankin and Neil Pettigrew with, enthusiastic, serious collectors like Simon and Rowan Greetham. So hopefully some of those folks will be at the Regent Street Cinema. And if you'd like to be involved in the book, you think you have something you could contribute, we'll be telling you a little bit later in this episode what's coming up next. And perhaps you can contribute, get a free copy of the book and have your name on the printed page. But next I think we're going to talk about all things summery, Connor. Whilst people were baking in 35-degree heats here in London and no doubt in Scotland, we were having a cooler time with a mere sort of 28-degree heat in San Diego, weren't we?
That's right, we headed along to the San Diego Comic-Con 2018 and made a number of presentations on July the 20th. Now, I'm sure everybody knows about San Diego Comic-Con. It's the biggest event in the world for film, for genre entertainment, for comics, for everything under the sun related to fantasy and science fiction. And of course, very strong links to Ray Harryhausen. Ray was there a number of times throughout his life, including appearances with his good friend Ray Bradbury, who was actually at the first ever Comic-Con 40 years ago. So strong links, and it was an honour to be there representing Ray and speaking to some of Ray's Californian fans.
Absolutely, and we got a chance to talk. So we were given the honour of having a panel at San Diego Comic-Con, so no mean feat to publicly speak in front of a large audience. And I was up first with my talk, Ray Harryhausen and Me, and here's a brief excerpt.
For now, let me hand you over to John Walsh for his presentation. Ray Harryhausen and Me.
Hello, and thank you all for coming. Now let's get this show started. This is brought to you by the Ray and Dinah Harryhausen Foundation. Now, Ray Harryhausen and Me, I'm the me here on the right-hand side. Can you believe it? In 1989 I shot this, and it was released in 1990. I was a student at the London Film School. I was 18, and I look as if I'm auditioning for Depeche Mode. I'm glad you got that reference. So, a quick show of hands, who here has heard of Ray Harryhausen? That's fabulous. Now, we're not going to tell you what you already know, but we will have to run through some of it. Now, sadly, when Ray died in May 2013, this is what George Lucas said. There would likely have been no Star Wars without Ray Harryhausen. Ray Harryhausen's inspiration goes with us forever, Steven Spielberg. Without Ray Harryhausen's influence, Lord of the Rings would never have been made, not by me at least, says Peter Jackson. To me, he was the guy that not only inspired me, but inspired almost any animator, says Tim Burton. Phil Tippett, who we know as almost the inheritor of the Harryhausen crown, with these wonderful animations for the George Lucas films. I'm always saying to the guys that I work with on computer graphics, do it like Ray Harryhausen. And perhaps this is the funniest and the most poignant. What we do now digitally with computers, Ray did digitally long before, without computers. So there you go, Connor. Quite a good reaction there from the crowds. You also followed by giving us a talk as well. What was your talk about?
Well, I thought it would be interesting to give some of Ray's fans an insight into the work that the foundation has been carrying out over the last few years. So within the archive, there are 50,000 items, and we're working tirelessly not only to catalogue the collection, but to preserve and promote the collection for future generations. Now, there was some exclusive looks at the treasures that are held within, and I think a lot of people think that they know everything that there is to know about Ray and his work. But we're uncovering new material every single day, which would which is just fascinating, including, as we've mentioned on this podcast before, the lost John Barry score for Clash of the Titans, pieces of Ray's collection that were long thought lost, such as the original Trog's horn from Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, and various other sculptures that he made over the years. So we took an in-depth look at some of the highlights that we've undertaken over the last few years, as well as looking into Alan Friswell's incredible restoration work. Alan is there to restore and ensure that the creatures are safe for travel around the world and that fans can enjoy them on display in museums and galleries.
Now, a big thank you to Elizabeth Reams and Steve Robes, who came along. They're filmmakers and writers. They came along and covered the event for us and did some wonderful photography and videography. And also Greg Coolan, who's working with me on my new book, which I teased you all about at the opening. Greg is really one of those great people who has kept pieces of Hollywood that would have otherwise been maybe discarded or thrown away. So he has a vast, vast collection, some of which is Ray Harryhausen related. And we caught up with Greg and with Elizabeth, and here's just a little bit of what both of them said to us about Comic-Con, about their collections, and about the influence that Ray had on their lives.
These eyes peer out through time, through space, to a land beyond imagination.
Elizabeth Reams, hello.
Hello.
Can you tell us a little bit about your history as a Ray Harryhausen fan?
Sure, I can tell you a little bit. There's a lot of history. It all started when my father, he raised me on black and white sci-fi and horror films, against my mother's request, but it is what it is. And she also raised me on like foreign movies, so it was kind of like this odd combination of some weird French foreign films and then black and white, really, kind of B movie type movies. And it really started with sort of seeing the stop motion animation of his work in certain films here and there, and I didn't know why, but I was riveted by it. And I started noticing how certain filmmakers were, using his work or the stop motion aspect of it, and the whole visual production value of it was much more impressive to me because it was more real than like special effects. Because special effects for me at my age was more like, I could go play a video game, or I could go, read a comic or something like that. But seeing something visually that affects me emotionally, it really had to do with something that it looked like I could touch. And that really stimulated my imagination. And so Ray Harryhausen's films did that for me tremendously as a young child. And I remember just really enjoying, I remember Sinbad on the Eye of the Tiger. The tiger stayed with me for weeks, thinking about that tiger and what it meant. Zenobia and, the Minotaur. There's a certain type of subtle passion in his characters that he creates, I feel, in all of his films. So when I see, like, him putting the work into how they move, and I know how he studied them in the past, but the way that they move, it's not necessarily like this soulless creature that he's created. It actually has a very intense, unknown purpose compared to the characters that are around him. So, such as Trog, who is actually one of my favorites, and I love analyzing that character and writing like backgrounds on this character of like, what did he think when he saw Jane Seymour, and why has he has this innate protection for her? Where did that come from? So it's more of like most of the characters that he's created, it stimulates my imagination much more than an actual actor being in the film and going, well, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing, because there's an unknown to his characters that we can't touch. We're like, why is this character that he's created doing this? We don't know, but we love it, and it really stimulates our minds. So I've been a fan of all of his work ever since.
And when your dad introduced you to the films, was it very much, these are Ray Harryhausen films and we're going to watch them all, or was it more like just films that he happened to enjoy, then that you start to realise that the same man was behind them all?
Exactly, the latter. So it was more like realising who was creating this, but then I start to see other filmmakers kind of try and do it as well. So like in the 80s, the Never Ending Story came out, and all of the different animatronics and the different characters there were happening. Those were really affecting me too, but I was trying to, as I did research, I was like, who actually started this? Who really got into this and made it happen? And it's obvious that they were all influenced by what he was doing. And then, of course, when Clash of the Titans came out, it was just a big deal because those characters were very driven that he created, from mythology. And so that really affected me too. And I saw the potential of what could happen with that.
Interestingly, Elizabeth, you mentioned Neverending Story. Colin Arthur, who's a special effects makeup artist and worked on Neverending Story and Dr. Fives in 2001, worked with Ray Harryhausen on Eye of the Tiger. So it's quite a small pool of talent, all of the sort of special effects, the physical sort of special effects world.
Right. Actually, the physical special effects is what I absolutely love. So when it comes to certain films like The Howling, for example, I used to be a fan. When Laserdiscs were out, I used to be a fan of like watching the B footage of the prosthetics and the visual effects designers trying to put this creature together and then trying to get it to explode, and then a balloon would burst and they'd be like, we have to do another take, So I'd always be watching that constantly, and then I would just be looking for films where it's like, is there any extra footage on how they created this creature? The movie The Thing, how did they do that? It's incredible, all of the visual that's coming out of it. The head being taken off and then with the legs coming out.
It's almost like puppetry, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. And I know all of that was inspired from Harryhausen. So there's so many artists that are inspired, and people, in my opinion, are very much into the visual aspects. They will watch a movie like The Thing. They will watch a movie like Clash of the Titans. They will watch a movie like The Howling or The Neverending Story and just be like, wow, what is that? But if you show them a film that's like that with computer generated and just like craziness, no work for our brain to do whatsoever, I think it's more of like, and then they look back down at their phone and just kind of see what's going on. But when there's actual visual elements happening, such as in Bram Stoker's Dracula, and you have a person going against a wall, and then all of a sudden they turn into a bunch of real rats and run around, I actually think that's inspired from Harryhausen, because there's all sorts of imagery that he was really promoting with his creatures.
Interestingly, though, you mentioned about the fights between the new and the old there, new technology and old and CGI versus. The market tells us and dictates to us that, CGI good, old school bad, colour good, black and white bad, of course.
Sure.
And so we're here at Comic-Con, which the perception is lots of very young, interesting people in fabulous costumes seeing the very latest films, whether it's the Marvel universe or the other spectacular universes. So how does something quite old school like Harryhausen fit into that? And of course, you came to the Harryhausen panel. I mean, how did it go, and how were you involved?
Yesterday's panel was a lot of fun. I was there to help do some videography and some shooting, along with my assistant, Steve Robles, who did a great job of photography. Really cool to see all of the people there. The first panel was all different age ranges. So you have like young people to people in their 20s and 30s. And all of them I felt were very riveted by your presentation, listening to you talk about what you found, all of them really into seeing what could potentially happen. When they heard about the potential of what may happen in regards to projects, I heard they were excited about that. And in the end, it was just about this awe. There was an overall awe. It wasn't like, oh, cool, this is going to be, let's talk about the next Marvel film. It was more of just like, this is something different, but it seems like it should be coming back. So that was the impression I got. The second panel was very much like that. There was a lot of people who were over 40, I think, that were in that one. And they were all very riveted, and I could hear a lot of just, wows coming when they saw the images and the posters. And people were very responsive. I didn't see one person in the audience actually going, this is boring and I'm not interested. Because all of the color art that you were showing and all of the different types of, characters in the film that you showed, that you did the documentary on, everyone could connect with what Ray was saying, and it was so great that we had that footage of Ray talking.
These are the eyes of the tiger. Follow their gaze back to where legends first began.
I'm at Comic-Con and I'm with Greg Coulon. And Greg, you have a specific sort of relationship with Ray Harryhausen. Tell me about that.
Well, I've been a fan of Ray's films since actually before I can remember. People ask me when I saw for the first time a Ray Harryhausen film, and I honestly don't know because I grew up in the Cleveland area and the films were broadcast all the time. And before I ever knew who Ray Harryhausen was, I was familiar with pretty much all of his black and white films and many of his color films. Probably wasn't until Famous Monsters of Filmland that I first read about and connected Ray Harryhausen, the name, to the films that I loved. And it was amazing how many of my favorite films were Ray Harryhausen films.
And you're wearing a fantastic Famous Monsters tribute shirt. And is that an original sort of edition that came out with the Cyclops on it?
That is. This is a cover from, I think it's number 27, the original. It's a green Cyclops, so it doesn't quite fit the reality of the situation. But Cyclops has always been probably my favorite Harryhausen character. So, over the years, I eventually got to meet Ray on several occasions and go to his house and talk to him and meet him at conventions when he would come here and in the States, and it was always great to talk to him and Diana over the years.
So today, saying that you like science fiction and dressing as your favourite character is considered to be, part of the run-of-the-mill. Years ago, there was very few magazines. Famous Monsters was kind of the premier magazine for covering this. There was never conventions. You couldn't dress in the streets as your favourite characters as a superhero. Things have changed a lot, Greg, haven't they?
Oh, it's a completely different world. I mean, you could maybe, the earliest conventions I remember were very small ones where you could buy an old issues of comic books or maybe find an old Famous Monsters or so. But there were no guests, there were no costumes, there were pretty much nothing. And then at some point, the Star Trek conventions starting to become a little more popular, and you could actually start finding some stills from Harryhausen films. I probably bought my first still from 20 Million Miles to Earth at a Star Trek convention, I think.
These would have been industry stills, wouldn't they? So they wouldn't have been available in shops.
That's right. They would have been press stills that somebody got a hold of from a publicity department or something, or sent to a newspaper that no longer needed it, and somehow got into private hands. And it was great to find those kinds of things. So I started collecting way back in the mid-'70s, I guess, on Ray Harryhausen. And as my wife would tell you, I haven't stopped.
But interestingly, you say, of course, these things were used by newspapers. They would have been put into a bin. They would have been thrown away after the film has come out. So much like a disused cornflake packet, once people are finished with it, it just goes in the trash. So you've really rescued these items in a way.
Many of them, yes. It's kind of funny because some you could find them date stamped and held in archives for years, and then eventually they were found. I've been able to find things like contact sheets from the photographer's proofs over the years, things like that probably were only 2 or 3 prints were ever made of before they, who knows if the negatives even exist anymore. And so it's great to find something like that and see a series of images that have never been, finished or shown before. I mean, I had the honor of Ray actually looking through my collection at one point in time because he wanted to see some of my pieces on O'Brien. And he was just, he didn't even know that there were that many publicity stills from some of these films that were put out there.
Because the studios, of course, would limit it, wouldn't they? If they wanted certain looks or certain film styles pushed forward, they might only send 2 or 3 versions of the front of house sets.
Yeah, that's right. There might be 300 or 400 or 3,000 or 4,000 photos taken on the set for a film like Golden Voyage of Sinbad, and then there'd be maybe 100 that became official studio stills, and then out of that there'd be a set of 15 or 20 that was the common ones that were sent out to most of the newspapers eventually. So
there was a real control, wasn't there? So even with Famous Monsters magazine, if they were very critical of a film, then a studio probably wouldn't allow them to reproduce stills. And even up until recent times, like the 70s with Starlog magazine, there was a sense that you had to be kind to films that were coming out. So if it was a film like Saturn III or Meteor, which kind of landed with real thuds, when I look back at old issues, the magazines are quite careful not to really rip them apart.
Oh, I think that was very true. And obviously, Famous Monsters, Forey and Ray being friends, there was always a positive story there. Some magazines eventually took a different turn and started going down a path where they would want to tell more salacious stories about movies and that. And I think, I have heard stories where they stopped giving them stills or production information or that just because of the tone. But in general, I think Ray's films were always well received, if only for the visual effects. But I mean, in so many cases, they had honestly great performers and great musical scores and so many things to recommend them. So it was always, I think, most of the magazines were usually pretty kind to Ray's films, and I think the time has only shown that's been well deserved, right?
Absolutely. Now, you've been working with us on our new Ray Harryhausen, The Lost Films. And in that book, of course, we're going to be featuring the films that he didn't make, the films he was asked to work on and wasn't able to, but also scenes from his existing films that either had something taken away or was removed before filming or after filming. And you've shown us some pretty unusual stills. Tell us about what you found.
Well, some of the things we found was most people wouldn't know that Peter Mayhew actually had 2 roles in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. Everybody, or many people I'm listening to this podcast know that he played the Minotaur before he played Chewbacca in Star Wars, but he also played the Trog. And I think there's only one very, very long shot that sits in the final film, because Ray personally told me that the live action scenes they filmed with Trog, primarily when they first encounter him, did not match right, and I think the suit was very bulky and hard to match. But we found some really excellent old photos from the set with Peter in the Trog costume confronting Patrick Wayne and the rest of the crew. So those are the kinds of things that are just wonderful to see and find out that these scenes had been filmed but never quite made it to the final print.
So now we have those wonderful stills that you rescued. It would be wonderful now to actually find some of the footage to see if there are any negative trims around.
It would be wonderful if anybody could ever pull that out and see how it worked. So maybe Ray's got it hidden somewhere, but
to look through all the film sheets. It's interesting because the face on Trog, it had quite a sort of a Jim Henson Creature Shop look about it, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. Mm-hmm. I thought it looked fantastic.
It's a nice sculpt, but it doesn't look like the finished Trog, right? So clearly Ray did some other things, and it doesn't have the horn. So it's kind of interesting to see that. Now, some of Ray's original art for Trog didn't have the horn either, so at some point in time, I don't know where he decided to add it in, but it obviously seems like it was a decision that was made after the filming of at least some of the live action sets.
I wonder if it's because the man in the suits looked like a man. I wonder if he was trying to separate it away from that, so by adding something else.
Yeah.
So it makes it seem more Neanderthal and more monster-like to actually add something.
Exactly, to make it look a little bit different.
Yeah. And also there were some other shots as well. That there was another character in the film that was played by a performer. What can you tell me about the baboon?
Oh, the baboon. Well, there was actually a costume for the baboon. Most people would know it. It never hit any of the publicity photos, but I don't know again if there's any footage that actually shows it. But it was used in many cases to interact with the actors. I think it was used for rehearsals. It may have been used for some very quick shots that they had tried to get it where it was a far shot. But there are several stills exist with the live action baboon interacting with some of the performers or in the cage on the in the deck of Sinbad's ship.
That's right. You can see it just as they throw on that rug and take off that rug.
Yes.
And after he goes back into the cage, after Zenobia's the Tyrone Power goes up and strokes him, and you just about see the live action suit.
That's right.
I think it works really well, but as you say, it's very small.
That's right.
Snippets of it. You have to be careful.
And it's obviously, you look at the photos, and it's not the kind of thing that you would have been able to hold in a close-up for several seconds, right? It's the kind of thing that you need in the darkness or in the back or a very quick shot. But it's very interesting, and Ray was able to save money, I'm sure, with many of the ways that he did these films, right? To make it real, right?
So it's quite a sort of a delicious prospect that there are things that have been filmed, like potentially, more footage of the baboon-suited person and the Trog-suited actor. And in Clash of the Titans, of course, as he said in my short documentary, he shot tests of Pegasus with just the legs hanging and the wings flapping, but it didn't work out, So I'd love to get some of those camera tests to see what they look like. So those trims, those neg trims are somewhere, so I'm hoping that we might uncover them.
That would be great to find. Someone somewhere probably has some of those, and it would be wonderful to see it.
Now, other things that Connor has found on the script for Clash of the Titans at the end, in one of the original drafts, Pegasus was to have been torn in half by the Kraken and thrown into the sea. The skeleton sequence in Jason the Argonauts was also meant to be originally set at night, not during the daytime. And so on. So there's lots of these sort of areas where things have been slightly changed or do exist, but in a slightly different form. Do you know of any kind of myths around Ray's films, that what should have been in or what wasn't, and how it could have been?
Well, the one I always thought of as the holy grail of a film that everybody wants to see, if it exists, was the shot of Ray had said that there was a shot that he had done for Jason in the skeleton fight, where the skeleton that had its head lopped off is crawling on its hands and knees looking to find the head. And I've always just wanted to see that, and I actually asked Ray about it one time, and he did say he filmed it. I asked him if we would ever see it, and I can't recall the comment he made, but I'm sure it was something along the lines of who knows where a piece of film like that would be.
So the censors actually asked for that to be taken out. So it was right up until the cutting copy. It may have been in one of the original answer prints, but before it went to theatres as a married print, that had gone. So I spoke to Grover Crisp at Sony Pictures, who's the restoration expert there, and he tells me that in the Sony archive there are no trims. So for films that are pre-1970s, there's no trims or outtakes, as they're sometimes called. So it doesn't mean they don't exist, but it's just in the Sony archive there are no trims or outtakes.
Oh, that's a shame.
So they may be with us. We have to have a look at everything because Connor has found that as he's looked through some of the boxes and some of the film cans, they're not correctly labelled. So we scanned some footage that should have been one film and it was in fact something else. But we found some really tantalising special effects test footage of things like Pegasus from Clash of the Titans.
Oh, those would be great to see.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see it seemed to me very rare that a footage Ray shot didn't make it into the film, other than maybe the ending and the beginning of the shot. But you can see in a few trailers, like the Jason and the Argonauts trailer, there's a scene from the skeleton fight, long shot of the 7 skeletons fighting the men. And that's in the trailer and not in the film, right? And I don't know, there's a gauge shot pops up in that shot. Maybe that's the reason it was cut, but it's just wonderful to find some of those things that you hadn't realized before.
When you say gauge, you mean a surface gauge?
A
that
surface
would have been
gauge,
a flash
yes.
frame. So,
yes, you
and
can.
the surface gauge would have been used to sort of measure the distance between one move and the other.
Exactly, yeah. And every once in a while you see a film where they're still in there. I have to tell you, there's probably a pet peeve of mine, is that when they digitize so many of Ray's films, I love to find the surface gauges, right? I mean, it's some of us just love to see that. And I remember a beautiful print screening of Seventh Voyage some years ago that we saw. I think Nathan Duran did the introduction to it. And unfortunately, I had to say at the end of the print, I just missed the gauges. They had cleaned them up. And I think Ray liked, that they cleaned up the gauges. And he would obviously have done that in the past. He, I guess, always marked the film so that they were to be removed when he knew he did it, and they didn't always get corrected. But it's kind of a nice thing to catch in the old days. It dates back to, even before King Kong, you could catch gauges in films.
He did ask me when they were doing the HD scan for Jason for the first Blu-ray. He said that he's been offered the opportunity to take the strings from some of the harpy sequence because he said it wasn't noticeable on Laserdisc or VHS or DVD, but for Blu-ray it shows up everything.
Yeah.
And I said to him, "Oh, and did you say no?" He said, "No, I said yeah." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Do you think I should have said no?" And I said, "Well, if it was me, I'd remove scratches, of course, and make the film more stable, of course, and add stereo sound and clean things up. But I wouldn't remove strings." I'm a great believer in it. If there's strings are there, then leave the strings.
I'm a bit of a conservationist myself, or an archivist. I love to see the old material, and it always kind of bothers me, honestly, a little bit when I see people changing the history, right? And I'd rather see it the way it was meant to be, or not so much the way it was meant to be, the way it originally was. You can't understand the history of special effects if everybody is digitally redoing the effects scenes in their films. I mean, someone might make the case in some years downstream to reproduce digital creations or add motion blur to the Cyclops, and that's a film I don't want to see.
Well, what did you think of the colorized versions? Because Ray's black and white films were colorized.
I thought they did a really nice job with those, and I actually had some conversations with Ray about that while they were doing them. While they were in the midst of that, and I enjoy them. But honestly, I still watch the black and white films, and I'm so glad that when they remastered, they gave you the choice: look at the color film or look at the black and white film. And I'm glad to have that choice. And I kind of really find the color interesting and enjoyable sometimes. But I'll watch the black and white when I'm by myself.
Now, you mentioned about sequences that were cut. Did you know there's 2 Clash of the Titans trailers, and it's the one that has all of the sort of Superman pop star effect where it goes with animations around. There's a scene of the Kraken coming out of the water that's not in the final print as well.
Oh, I guess I hadn't noticed that one.
Yeah, so if you track down, it's the first of the 2 trailers for Clash of the Titans, one that's not on DVD, but it is online on the Warner Brothers YouTube channel. And you can see, you'll notice it when you see it because it sticks out like a sort of thumb. There's this kind of awkward turn that the Kraken does.
Interesting. I'll have to check that.
Yeah, and I've checked with Colin Arthur as well. He doesn't know about trims or anything, but it was the large Colin Arthur phone that came up. Lastly, Greg, if I can ask you, is there anything that you would like to find that's out there that's Harryhausen related that you haven't got yet in your collection?
Oh.
And my second part of the question, what's the jewel in your crown of your collection?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, to me, I I'm very interested in the films that never got made, right? The pieces of art that were done for a film that couldn't quite get financed. So that would be the things that I'd most interesting find. And the jewel in my collection, it probably goes along with that in some respects, is well, in some cases I'll say I've been a fan of Willis O'Brien, and I think I've got some Willis O'Brien art in my collection. That's the highlight of where my interest is. But
it's like picking a favorite child. It's very difficult, isn't it?
It is very difficult to do. I have a really interesting piece that Ray did that was published in a Forey Ackerman fanzine in 1940, and it's kind of it's kind of a Ray's piece of science fiction art with almost a science fiction head with a body with mechanical feet. That's very interesting, and that might be the jewel there from the Harryhausen standpoint. It's just a very different design than what you normally see Ray did. Matter of fact, it's from a book where there's Ray's artwork is on the other side of it as well. And when I first showed it to Ray, even though it was a published drawing, he didn't quite recognize it. But when he turned it over, it's got a Allosaurus that Ray did, patterned after the famous Charles Knight painting. And as soon as he saw that, he's like, "Oh yes, I remember that." And it's also got a little Kong and a little dragon, and it's a kind of a special piece, seeing how talented he was at such a young age.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, Greg, thanks very much, and hopefully we'll see you at next year's 2019 Comic-Con when we're going to be back with our book, Ray Harryhausen, The Lost Films.
I'm looking forward to it.
Where fantasy is real and the land of the lost is rediscovered.
So enthusiastic comments there, Connor. It's great to meet people who we would never have got to meet otherwise, but through the connection of Ray Harryhausen. Really talented people like Elizabeth, and enthusiastic collectors, very serious collectors such as Greg. It really is one of those places, Comic-Con, isn't it? Although it's really, really busy, the goodwill is 100%. There was no pushing, no shoving. There was no aggro at all, was there?
It's a wonderful atmosphere, a really nice place to go for people who are interested in this kind of genre entertainment. And as you mentioned, fans like Elizabeth and like Greg, really, they represent the different spheres of influence that Ray's had over the years. So somebody like Greg who got to meet and got to know Ray over the years and has a vast collection of material relating to his films, to a young filmmaker like Elizabeth who's been inspired by Ray and was inspired to get in touch with us and offer her assistance in our photography and recording at Comic-Con. So we're very grateful to both, and to Steve Robles as well for his help with the videography. And getting to chat with Ray's fans in California really was fantastic. Whenever we mentioned Ray's name to somebody and explained why we were at Comic-Con, people's eyes lit up, and we were regularly told about how much his films had influenced, as we always are, as much people are always keen to tell us just how much they love Ray's films and how much he continues to inspire them. And San Diego Comic-Con is the perfect place to catch up with fans of a similar nature.
And probably the best example of that was we went to someone else's panel. It happened to be about stop motion. And Connor, you stood up and asked the question and got an applause for the question that you asked, which was incredibly sweet and endearing. And everyone's going to wonder, what was that question? So what was the panel? It was a mixed stop motion panel, wasn't it? With recently retired filmmakers and some active filmmakers, all kind of lamenting the early demise of stop motion about 10 years ago, and now are celebrating its return. But you asked them a particular question, didn't you?
That's right. It was Stephen Chiodo from the famous Chiodo brothers, who are incredible stop motion animators, and I was quite interested on a professional, on a personal level, on their own collections. So how their models had survived over the years following projects that they worked on. And very sadly, it is quite difficult for many stop motion animators to keep a hold of models and things that they've worked on over the years, just because of the nature of the industry. And it does just cast light on how incredible Ray Harryhausen's collection actually was, because unfortunately many creators like him were unable to keep any of the artifacts from their long and varied film careers. And to have 50,000 items packed with some of the most famous special effects creations of all time, amongst a heap of lost treasures, is just a wonderful resource and an incredible thing to be able to share with fans.
So you didn't answer my question, so I'm going to tell everyone. You stood up and you said, "Oh, hello, I'm from the Ray Harryhausen Foundation. I have a question to ask," and people just burst out into applause.
Well, that's true. I wasn't looking for an applause. I just happened to mention, just to give a little context to my question. But as you say, it gives an insight into just how warmly Ray is remembered by fans of film.
You weren't looking for the applause, I was. So I thought it was great that you stood up and got that reaction. So that was marvellous. And of course, people in the room then came up to us afterwards and said, "Well, we came to your talk," or "We're sorry you missed your talk," and so on. So it's a great sort of environment within which to feel loved and to give love and so on. We're going to come back to Greg Coulon and his collection and how it relates to us. But we have an interesting announcement to make about a special honour for Ray Harryhausen, Connor, don't we?
That's right. Ray has been nominated for the Visual Effects Society Hall of Fame, and he's going to be inducted this year. Alongside other luminaries such as Derek Meddings, Saul Bass, and Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry. So a lot of big names there, and Ray stands out amongst them as one of the honorees to the Visual Effects Society's Hall of Fame. Now, when we announced this, a couple of fans asked why Ray hadn't been nominated for this before. In fact, this is only the second year that the Visual Effects Society have earned their Hall of Fame awards, and so appropriately Ray was one of the first names on their list, and they reached out to us and asked if we'd be interested in attending the ceremony, and there should be some news on that very soon on the date and location of the ceremony, and when that's publicly released we'll have some special events and special posts on our Facebook and Twitter accounts to commemorate this honour, and it's very appropriate that Ray should be awarded this incredible honour.
Interestingly, Derek Meddings mentioned there, so between Supermarionation, the kind of Jerry Anderson puppet style, and Dynamation, the Ray Harryhausen coined interaction, very similar folks. Derek Meddings worked either in a small team or on his own. He used practical effects and in-camera effects, so did as much in-camera as possible. So much like Ray Harryhausen. I was recently watching the 4K restoration of Moonraker, which is one of my favourite Bonds, and surprisingly, one of the most successful Bonds up to that point was Moonraker. And the effects really hold up fantastically well. A lot of backwinding in the camera, a lot of masking off, and also that there wasn't any generational loss by putting the film through processes such as optical printers and so on. So I think it's really nice that Derek Meddings is being honoured alongside Ray. They very much liked each other. In fact, they appeared in John Landis's film Spies Like Us, along with Terry Gilliam in a big tent sequence where they were all doctors. So very nice that the late Derek Meddings is being honoured there as well. So, well, good luck with that ceremony, Connor. I won't be with you, but I'll certainly be with you in spirit. And I think it's marvellous that they're inducting Ray.
Yes, quite right, and I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful evening. Now, in terms of other news, John, you've teased it, so I think you need to say a little more about the latest book project, because hot on the heels of Harryhausen, the poster art, we have another special book lined up with Titan Books. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I can officially announce that Harryhausen The Lost Movies, or Lost Films, depending on your preference there, will be out this time next year. So we are fully underway. We have been for a few months now, but we've been embargoed from talking about it. And you might think, oh, well, hang on, I know that. Didn't he want to make War of the Worlds and he didn't? And didn't he want to do Force of the Trojans and it never happened? Yeah, I know all that. Well, that's what you think. As Connor said earlier, the more we look into the world of Ray Harryhausen, the more we realise we don't know the full story. So the book, which is going to have some fabulous art that you do know, and lots that you've never seen before, some by Ray and some by other very well-known artists, is going to be in three sort of main areas. So the films Ray planned to make, such as War of the Worlds and Force of the Trojans that he didn't make, they will be in there. Scenes from the films he did make that were deleted or amended or changed, they will be in there. And I think you'd be quite surprised at what could have happened as a pre-title sequence to Clash of the Titans, what could have befell Pegasus at the end of Clash of the Titans, what really wanted to happen in the middle of Golden Voyage of Sinbad. We have sketches, we have artwork, we have interpretations. And then the third area are the films Ray was offered that he had to turn down, such as King Kong. He was offered more than once by different studios at different times by different people. And what we're doing here today is we're asking the fans if they'd like to be part of this. Now, Greg Coulon's really played a key role for us by supplying images, both artwork and photography, that do not exist in the Foundation's archive or not in the high quality that they are in Greg's archive. We're asking you, the listeners, to be involved with us. If you have something you think that would be appropriate for the lost films of Ray Harryhausen and you'd like to include it in the book, then you'll get a free copy of the book. You'll get a credit on the page where your item has been shown, and you can contact us directly about that, can't they, Connor?
Yes, that's right. If you, similar to the poster book last year, we've set up a special email address for this latest book project, and if you contact us at lostfilms@rayharryhausen.org.uk with any interesting information that you may have on these projects that never quite surfaced, then please do get in touch. We'd be delighted to hear from you and to learn more about your collection. As you heard with the interview with Greg Coulon, fan collections are a really incredible insight for us into items that we may not have within our collection, and it just goes to show you sort of the breadth of work that Ray carried out throughout his career, that there's 50,000 items here, but there's still more out there that we haven't seen yet. And so if you have anything that you think may be of interest, even anecdotes or photographs or things that you think we may not have seen, then please do get in touch.
Absolutely. It's easier for you to contact us and we say, no, we've got that, or yes, please, can we have that? We have other well-known artists that did concept art for Ray's films that have never been seen. And one in particular is being completed by a well-known artist because he only got halfway through it at the time. So in previous publications, there's been a few sketches and a sort of a brief idea of what the missing films could have been. But this will be a definitive tome which will have everything in it, we hope, and some very high-quality art, and the likes of which have never been seen on the page before. And this time next year, hopefully we'll be inviting you all to different screenings for Ray Harryhausen's Lost Films and showing you some interesting test footage. Some of you may have seen some of it. You haven't all seen all of it, because myself and Connor have recently scanned footage with Final Frame in London that hadn't been seen for over 30 years. So there's always something new to be found, and it's a revelation, isn't it, Connor? Every time we go to the well of Ray Harryhausen, we get soaked with more treasures.
Well, yes, and I think fans are going to be astounded by what they eventually see in this new book. There is such a vast collection of footage here from Ray's own VHS collection, its Betamax collection, and the films that he held on to. And as you mentioned, we've had some of this experimental footage scanned recently, and really wonderful to see, just to see aspects of his filmmaking process which have probably never been seen before. So you'll be able to reveal some of this in the book, and it's been a real pleasure to work upon the research for this.
Well, as always, I can't do it without your help, Connor. And so to remind everyone, it's Lost Films, all one word, Lost Films, at rayharryhausen.org.uk.
Now, in our last episode, we put a little teaser in for a major exhibition which will be taking place in the summer of 2020. And since that episode was released, we can now officially announce that the largest exhibition of Ray Harryhausen's work will be taking place at the National Galleries of Modern Art in Scotland, in Edinburgh, from May 2020 till October. So 4 months, large-scale exhibition in Edinburgh in the National Gallery of Modern Art, which is an incredible building. And for the first time, Ray's entire archive will be accessible. So whilst there was a number of wonderful exhibitions throughout Ray's lifetime, we now have everything together and it's all been archived in one place, and you'll be able to see items from throughout Ray's life, from his very earliest creations right the way through to projects he was working on just 10 years ago or so. So it's going to be an incredible exhibition. We're going to mark Ray's centenary, and further details to be announced, but mark that date in your diary for your summer holidays in 2 years' time. Get your flights prepared and get ready, because this is going to be something incredibly special.
It is indeed, and as we lead up to the preparations for this mega exhibition, we'll be speaking to some of the creative people involved, both at the museum and the external people who will be coming in to create a pretty unique vision. So as Connor was saying, if you think you've seen the collection before, well, thank you for coming, but please now see what will hopefully be the definitive collection with many unseen items and displayed in a way that's I think a real tribute to one of the giants of cinema in his centenary year.
That's right. So we will be updating you in the Ray Harryhausen podcast over the years to come, but suffice to say, make your plans for the summer of 2020. It's going to be something special. Up next, we have a preview of a very special interview which we conducted with Mark Gatiss, actor, director, writer of The League of Gentlemen, Doctor Who, Sherlock, and so many other classic television shows, books and movies. Mark is also a huge fan of Ray Harryhausen. Now, we're going to play the full interview in a special one-off episode soon. We're going to play you a clip relating to yet another project which Ray Harryhausen was offered and asked to work upon, because as Mark reveals, the League of Gentlemen asked Ray if he would consider animating on their 2005 film, The League of Gentlemen's Apocalypse. Now, for those of you who've seen the film, there was a wonderful stop-motion sequence in the movie, and as Mark reveals, they turned to Ray and asked him if he would consider animating one final time on the League of Gentlemen's Apocalypse. Let's hear what Mark had to say now, and look out for the full interview coming soon.
Yes, it's true. Well, of course, we wanted to have a stop-motion monster in it, so what else would we do but ask Ray Harryhausen? I mean, I knew he was basically long retired, but you never know. I'm always doing this. There's no harm in asking. So we wrote to him, and we've got this sequence, and I mean, it was obviously a ridiculous long shot, but we thought we couldn't really rest if we didn't do it. And then I met him at the Empire Awards, which must have been about 2004 or 5. I knew his voice so well from all the documentaries. He sounded the way I want God should speak, I think. He was very. He was like, he said, "Oh, you asked me to do your picture." It was something like Jimmy Stewart. It was something. I love that sort of slightly hesitant. Like his voice was like hickory wood. I'm very flattered, but I'm long since retired. But I mean, God, it was like touching the hem of his garment. It was so thrilling. It was very, very sweet. And I just gushed and said like what he must have heard every 5 minutes, which is that he sort of made my childhood and all our childhoods. So we did in the end. A company called McKinnon Saunders did our two. We had two. We had a 3-headed monster and a sort of homunculus, and then they were done with stop motion. So it was our little nod to Ray's legacy.
I have heard there is a tree at the end of the world, with a fleece of gold hanging in its branches.
And now to finish off, let's hear from Ray Harryhausen himself from my 1989 shot but 1990 released Ray Harryhausen Movements into Life, where he discusses the influence of Gustave Doré and a film that could have been that never was. And until next time, thank you very much, and I look forward to receiving your emails.
Classical mythology, science fiction, Arabian Nights, and for some time he pondered the idea of bringing Dante to the screen.
Some time ago I wanted to make a film about Dante's Inferno because of Gustave Doré's marvelous drawings. But in thinking it over, I wonder very seriously how many people can sit through an hour and a half of the vicissitudes of tormented souls.
Ray has admired and studied Doré since he was a student.
He was my mentor. I based my style of drawing on Gustave Doré, and I find that he has a great imagination. He was really the original art director for films, because most of the early filmmakers studied his drawings to a great degree for crowd composition. Cecil B. DeMille used to use them a great deal, and so did Marion Cooper and Willis O'Brien.
Copyright in the Ray Harryhausen podcast is owned by the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, a registered Scottish charity, number SC 001 419 2018. This recording may not be reproduced in whole or in part without written permission from the Foundation. The views expressed within these podcasts do not necessarily reflect those of the Foundation, its trustees or employees. For further terms and conditions, please contact us at rayharryhausen.com, where you can find our Facebook and Twitter links.